Good afternoon and welcome to our TV show featuring documentaries revealing the realities behind myths using research and scholarship. I'm your host, Ergün Kırlıkovalı, and I will be with you every Sunday at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. You're welcome to send me your feedback at mythsandrealities.com. The clock does not start in 1915. Armenians love to start the clock on April 24th, 1915, but they conveniently forget to tell you that they had killed 120,000 Muslims, mostly Turks, by the end of 1914 alone. See page 34 of the Macmillan Dictionary of the First World War. And another 80,000 during the Van Rebellion. See McCarthy's book, The Armenian Rebellion at Van. The extermination of Muslims of Van by Armenian insurgents was so devastating that the entire Muslim section of the city of Van was leveled. These horrific numbers come to about 1.33% of the total Ottoman population when the first year of World War I was not even completed yet. Imagine 1.33% of America's population, that is about 4.4 million Americans, being murdered in a matter of 6 months by a violent, traitorous insurgent group residing in the United States. What would America do? Would America stop at Tereset, temporary resettlement, like the Ottoman Empire did? Or would another Nagasaki on the table? Armenians today are pounding your kitchen table with their shoes every day, playing the sole victim, poor, innocent angels. But the facts tell us a different story, a story of persistent propaganda, violent agitation, systematic terrorism, bloody revolts, supreme treason, territorial demands, raids, assassinations, bombings, murders, and more. Armenians took up arms against their own government and killed their Muslim neighbors and fellow Ottoman citizens. What's even worse is that the Ottoman Armenians heinously handed over the Ottoman city of Van that they had cleansed of its Muslim inhabitants over to the invading Russian armies and then joined them in search of more Turks to kill. Turks only defended their home. The homeland security measure that the Turks took to mitigate this serious wartime military threat was temporary resettlement, or Tereset for short, of the Armenian insurgents and their supporters. But that is old history. In the 100+ years since then, a lot has changed. Turks chose to forgive and forget and forge ahead with hope. Turks built a nation out of the remnants of a collapsed empire and an economy that ranks in the top 20 in the world today. What did Armenians do in the meantime? They cultivated hatred and vengeance, promoting a bogus genocide. They should blame the Armenian leaders for causing Armenians to undermine a millennium of relatively peaceful cohabitation with Turks in Anatolia. They should hold accountable the Armenian terror groups like the Dashnaks, the Hunchaks, Armenakans, Ramgavars, Nemesis, and more recently Asala, JSAG, ARA, and others, for spreading discord and polarization in the Ottoman communities. Betrayals and revolts followed. It was always easier to defame and blame Turks while embellishing personal suffering to claim a genocide, totally ignoring the Armenian complicity in the tragedy and the even more enormous Turkish suffering in the process. After all, it was the Turkish lands that were under vicious attacks from all corners. Of most Armenians chose to join the invading enemies. Don't you think that time has come to see the other side of the medallion? One-sided, unfair approach to Turkish-Armenian conflict means a perpetual state of no closure and chaos. Maybe 2020s will provide a forum for civilized dialogue by honest truth seekers. Maybe reasonable people will finally realize that there is indeed another side to this story. The story of tens of millions of people like me whose family endured unspeakable atrocities at the hands of Balkan Christians and Armenian cadets from the Armenian Military Academy of Bulgaria, established in 1906. Balkan Wars of 1912 and 1913 were a prelude to what was to come. Most Western scholars disregard the colossal Turkish suffering and losses where 1.5 million Muslims, mostly Turks, were slaughtered and 500,000 were forced to flee. Historian and demographer Justin McCarthy's research shows us that between 1770 and 1923, 5 million Muslims were forcibly displaced in the Ottoman Empire geography, as opposed to 1.9 million Christians. Yet, all we hear about is the Christian displacements and Christian suffering, as if Turks are not human beings and their suffering does not count. I want to shine a spotlight on this kind of racist and dishonest treatment of the Turkish-Armenian conflict since the 19th century, continuing, unfortunately, to this very day. Here are some erroneous statements Armenian writers, speakers, and their supporters will write and say to influence unsuspecting audiences. Quote, "The Turkish-Armenian conflict started in 1915, unquote. The short answer is that it did not. Armenian insurgency goes back to 1862, that is 53 years before 1915, even earlier. Armenians write, Turks deported Armenians. No, Turks temporarily resettled them. Tehcir is the original term used in Turkish. Tereset is the most appropriate counterpart in English. Deportation means sending people out of the country, whereas the Armenians were temporarily resettled in other parts of the same country during the end of the war. Regulations and procedures were put in place to process the abandoned Armenian property. If the Armenians had not betrayed their country so heinously during a war of survival for the Turks and had not killed so many Muslims, mostly Turks, arrogantly and viciously undermining the millennium of peaceful cohabitation, none of this would have happened. These are the hard facts. Armenians claim that Turks killed hundreds of thousands of Armenians. This is an ignorant embellishment bordering on deliberate fraud. While the Armenian writers cannot prove their wild claims to the satisfaction of scholarly scrutiny, the Turkish Historical Society meticulously documented 54,000 fatalities based on police and army records, of which 8,400 were due to bullets, the rest to the elements. The Turkish Historical Society is ready to face the scrutiny of a competent tribunal on this and to effortlessly convince the court, like it convinced the highest court in Europe, the European Court of Human Rights in 2015. Armenians assert that the alleged Armenian genocide is the first genocide of the 20th century, another fallacious statement on two grounds. First, the campaign of ethnic extermination and collective punishment waged by the German Empire against the Herero, the Nama, and the San in Namibia, starting in 1904, is considered the first genocide, for lack of a better word, of the 20th century. Second, the use of the term genocide is wrong, as it did not exist at the time of committing of the crime. Genocide came into being in 1951. Since no law is retroactive, the term cannot be applied to events before 1951. But Armenian writers and their allies are disrespectful of international law and historical facts. They will claim that it is genocide in their admired opinion, thus displaying the failure to understand to letter and spirit of the genocide law. They're covering a mistake with another mistake. And that's normal when one reads with caution. What's even more interesting is that while it's clearly first genocide of the 20th century, it is certainly first apartheid attempted in the 20th century. Armenians succeeded, if Armenians succeeded, it would be the first apartheid of the 20th century, where a Christian minority would be ruling over the Muslim majority. The Armenians also write this falsehood, quote, "By the end of the First World War, the number of Armenians in what would become Turkey had been reduced by 90%. More than 1 million people gone. unquote. The implication is that they are all somehow killed by Turks, but that is not true. Most of those Anatolian Armenians migrated to Armenia, about 400,000 of them, Europe, North America, and other places, about 100,000 of them, while others reached Syria, about 500,000 of them, as a result of the Tereset, Temporary Resettlement Order of May 31st, 1915. These numbers total up to 1 million. They are all accounted for, excluding the 54,000 casualties explained above. Many Armenians did not return to Turkey after 1919, but many of them did. But then left again, fearing retaliations for what they've done during the French occupation of southeastern Anatolia, victimizing Muslims, mostly Turks. Armenian writers complain that a century later, the Armenian genocide remains controversial. By using the term genocide deceptively, as if it's a retroactive, a foregone conclusion and settled history, the complaint implies that there is a court verdict somehow, a la Nuremberg, that characterizes the Turkish-Armenian conflict as genocide. But that is a complete falsehood. While the Jewish Holocaust is a rock-solid fact, proven by the October 1st, 1946 verdict of the Nuremberg Tribunal, the Armenian genocide remains a long discredited political claim. This view is upheld by the European Court of Human Rights, which stated in its 2013 verdict that the existence of a genocide, which was a precisely defined legal concept, was not easy to prove. ECHR then added that it doubted that there could be a general consensus, given that the historical research was, by definition, open to discussion and a matter of debate, without necessarily giving right to final conclusions or to the assertion of objective and absolute truths, unquote. Thus, the ECHR creating a legal precedent of inadmissibility of any comparison between the Holocaust and the Armenian claims. The latter lacks what the former clearly has: concrete historical facts, clear legal basis, and existence of the acts that had been found by an international court to be clearly established, unquote. Knowing the weaknesses of the claims in international law and historical evidence fronts, the Armenian propagandists cling to the Jewish Holocaust simply to establish their credibility by association. They know full well that the Jews did not establish Jewish armies, resort to terrorism, kill 500,000 Germans, sided with the invading enemy armies to establish a Jewish state on German soil. Armenians, on the other hand, did all that and worse in the 60 years before, from 1860 to 1922, in the Ottoman lands. How can the two be compared? None of what is said till now can be construed as an effort to minimize the Armenian suffering, which was real, deep, and wide. But this suffering cannot be viewed as separate from the even deeper and wider Muslim, mostly Turkish suffering in the same era and area, due to same wartime conditions. Besides, Armenians were not innocent bystanders in this conflict. As chairman of the Armenian National Delegation to Paris Peace Conference of 1919, Bogos Nubar said, belligerents, in his letter, they betrayed their country by joining the invading enemy armies during a war of survival for the Ottoman Empire. A significant number of those Muslim victims met their tragic deaths at the hands of Armenian revolutionaries. Armenian claims are based on a dishonest and racist version of history. Racist because Turkish victims of Armenian atrocities are deliberately ignored, as if Turks are somehow subhumans, and dishonest because Armenian revolts, terrorism, raids, assassinations, bombings, treason, territorial demands, and the Turkish dead resulting from such Armenian hate crimes during World War I are prejudicially dismissed, leaving half the story out. Armenians blame Turkey and Turks for nationalist myths, propaganda, and denial. But then, where do they place this photo located at ethocide.com? Armenian cadets, uniformed and well-armed, arrogantly brandishing their Russian-made Mosin rifles at the Armenian Military Academy established in 1906 in Bulgaria. Do they look like poor, starving Armenians to you? Or loyal Ottoman citizens? Or unarmed civilian non-combatants? That everything started in 1915? There goes the entire genocide myth. Historical facts simply do not support a genocide case. Armenians will also argue that they have, from archival documents. Turkish archives are open since mid-1980s, but most Armenian scholars are not there. The researchers who burned midnight oil and finally realizing the other side of the story, while more than 100 countries to date sent their scholars to study those archives, Armenians' archives are still closed. What are the Armenians afraid of? If the official Armenian narrative is so right and so historically true, so damning, so reliable, then why not sue the Turkish government, Turkish state, in an international court? And why do they not open the archives? Do they fear that we will find smoking guns there? They may be right. Food for thought. Armenians often allege eyewitness accounts, but provide only hearsay, second or third party accounts, and even forgeries. Good examples are the nonsense that are fabricated and submitted to the British Propaganda Office, filling the entire Blue Book, which is a propaganda piece, all of which were thankfully exposed by historian McCarthy's brilliant research in British archives. Other examples of falsehood fill yet another book by Professor Turkkaya Ataev called Armenian Falsifications. Armenian misrepresentations and fraud know no ends. At this point, I will let a Christian missionary, George M. Lamsa, respond to Armenian writers and their non-Armenian supporters in the simple language of honesty by quoting from Lamsa's book, The Secret of the Near East, The Ideal Press, published in 1923, page 133. In some towns containing 10 Armenian houses and 30 Turkish houses, it was reported that 40,000 people were killed, about 10,000 women were taken to the harem, and thousands of children left destitute, and the city university destroyed and bishop killed. It is a well-known fact that even the last war in the native Christians, despite the Turkish cautions, armed themselves and fought on the side of the Allies. In these conflicts, they were not idle, but they were very well supplied with artillery, machine guns, and inflicted heavy losses on their enemies, unquote. So I'm asking now, where is the pain and suffering of my people, the Turks, in the Armenians' racist and dishonest narrative? I do not see it, do you? The alleged Armenian genocide is a long discredited political claim, not a court-proven fact. Such a claim cannot be substantiated with historical evidence. The trouble with the official Armenian narrative is that it ignores Turkish suffering at the hands of Armenian revolutionaries and dismisses Armenian complicity, including but not limited to the Armenian revolts, terrorism, treason, territorial demands, and more. It is based on selective sources employing a healthy dose of bias and Turkophobia. It was a wartime tragedy, all right, but not genocide. If one cherishes values like objectivity, fairness, truth, and honesty, one must use the phrase Turkish-Armenian conflict. Asking someone, do you accept or deny Armenian genocide, only shows anti-Turkish bias. The question to ask should be, what is your stand on the Turkish-Armenian conflict? Turks believe it was a civil war within a world war, engineered, provoked, and waged by the Armenians with active support from Russia, England, and France, and passive support from the US diplomats, missionaries, and media, and others with anti-Turkish agendas, all coveting the vast territories of the collapsing Ottoman Empire. Most Armenians claim that the wartime terraset, temporary settlement, of the Armenians was genocide, exploiting universal suffering of all the people of the area and only focusing on embellishing of the Armenian suffering. Genocide is a technical legal term with a very specific definition requiring a verdict by a competent tribunal proving intent to destroy, which the official Armenian narrative clearly lacks. There's a massive evidence pointing to a civil war fought by Muslims and Christian irregulars, as 69 historians said in a public letter published in the New York Times in 1985. In episode 42 next week, I would like to explore with you the 15 T's of the Turkish-Armenian conflict that Armenian writers and their supporters completely ignore. If we, the Turks and Armenians, could not arrive at a common narrative based on historical evidence, mutual pain, and just memory in 100+ years, it is because of the long discredited political claim of genocide that ignores all the 15 T's. What are they? Well, please stay tuned to find out. Thank you for joining me, and see you next week.